Hi everyone, my name is Scott Davenport, and it's wonderful to be here for another episode of Perfect Inspiration. A big thanks to my friends at On1 for having me back to share another photo with you. I'm a landscape photographer based in San Diego, California, and have been using the Perfect Photo Suite for many years. Most of the images you see scrolling by right now have in some way been touched by the On1 suite. You can learn more about me and see some more examples of my work on my website, scottdavenportphoto.com. I also have an active blog where I share tutorials, videos, some behind-the-scenes clips, and of course, photos. I also have a storefront there that has a few On1 goodies in it that you might like to check out, and the links to my social media presences are also there, and I invite you to look me up and connect. Living in San Diego and loving the ocean, I spend a lot of time at the beach. So for today's Perfect Inspiration, I thought I'd take you for a walk on the beach. A few months ago, I went just north of San Diego to Carlsbad, California, and shot a bunch of images. And what you see here are all straight out of the camera. Carlsbad's a very flat beach. The only large subject is this jetty that reaches out into the ocean. It's much different than the rock-strewn beaches at the base of cliff faces that I tend to shoot. There's a much deeper expanse of sand, which is great for the reflections in the sky. However, it becomes challenging to find a good foreground subject. So as I walked along this beach, I found this clump of seaweed to be interesting. I started working the scene. I tried different angles, keeping more sand in the foreground, including the jetty in the frame, excluding the jetty from the frame, getting closer to the seaweed. I'm not sure what I was doing with my lens hood on this shot. I then added a neutral density filter to get a longer exposure and got some nice streaks in the water. I tried simplifying the composition, only using the seaweed and a distant horizon for depth. Keeping with the longer exposures, I brought the jetty back in and just kept working the scene until finally the sun started to go down and the light faded. Of these shots, I really like this image. I like that it's simple, it's soft, it's calm. It needs a little cleanup. There's some good lines in the water, and those intersect with the diagonal that the seaweed is on. And the seaweed is kind of pointing off into the distance where the sun is setting, so this is the image that we're going to work with today. Here in Lightroom, the first thing I'm going to do straight away is go to the lens corrections, turn on the profile corrections, and take care of that bowed horizon. Much better. I was shooting wide at 18mm, and that was really warping the shot. Next, some basic adjustments. First up is the white balance, and I'm going to try auto just to see what it does. And I don't like that. I like the cooler tone better. Let me cool down the image with the temperature slider. And as I work the slider, my eyes are on the image, mostly watching the clouds, which should stay mostly white in the sky. That's good there. The clouds are mostly white, and we're not clipping any highlights. Now, overall, the image feels a little overexposed, so I'm going to take the exposure slider down maybe a third of a stop or so, and we'll start to see more of those streaks in the water appear. Next is the white and black points. I'll start with the white slider. Now, while holding down the Option key on a Mac, and I think that's the Alt key on a PC, I'll drag the white slider to the right, brightening the image, brightening the whites. Using the Option key will show me when the whites start to clip, and there they are. I'll back that off just a hair. Good. I'll repeat this for the blacks, holding down the Option key and sliding the black slider to the left until I start to see the clipping. And in this image, that should be in the shadows under the seaweed. There they are. And I'm going to keep the clipping there. I like to have a few pure blacks in my photos. Now to add some contrast and get more definition in those fingers of water so they have more presence. I'm also going to play around with the highlights and the shadow sliders a bit. And all I'm doing here is experimenting with the slider and watching the image. And I reduce the highlights. There's some more definition in the sky, and that's nice. And for the shadows, there really aren't a lot of shadows in this image, so just a little experimentation, maybe a slight nudge to the left to deepen those darks around the seaweed. Okay, a couple more basic adjustments in Lightroom. I'll add a little clarity for a subtle touch of pop in the water, and a very slight touch on the vibrance. I'd like more color in this foreground seaweed, but I think I'm going to address this in the Perfect Photo Suite. The last thing I like to check in Lightroom before heading into the suite is dust spots. I'll select the Spot Removal tool, and I'll press the T for the toolbar and click on Visualize Spots. Now this image does have some texture, so there's going to be lots of streaks and lines, but this spot over here looks unnatural. I'll play with the Visualize Spots slider to see if any other spots present themselves, and it looks like it's just the one. I'm done, so I'll click Done and press T to hide the toolbar again. And zoom into this area where this spot, sure enough, is here. Okay, grab the spot removal tool, increase the size with the right bracket key, click once, and the spot's taken care of. All right, so in Lightroom, we've done some basic adjustments. We started here, corrected the lens warping, adjusted the whites, the blacks, the exposure, and this is looking good. It's a very solid base for stylization. Now, we'll bring this into the photo suite, do some cleanup on these wisps of seaweed and this larger piece over here, and then add a few finishing touches. I'll launch the image into the suite with File, Plug in Extras, Perfect Photo Suite 9, and this will load in. In the photo suite, I'll start in Perfect Layers because there is retouching to be done. First and foremost is to get rid of this smaller flap of seaweed, and also brush away some of the wisps that are hanging off the main subject. These just distract from the subject, and I just want it to be a large clump of seaweed. So let's start with the larger of the two, this flap over here. I'll zoom in at 100% and position the navigator over this area of the photo. And the first thing I'll deal with is this very small wisp here. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool to remove this, and this will help maintain the texture in the sand. I'll make sure my opacity is at 100% and bump the feather a bit. Now I'll press the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and click to set the sample point for the clone tool. And I get this little swatch, this sample, that I can paint elsewhere in the image. Then I brush this sample in and remove the unwanted seaweed. I'll do that again, sampling to the right and then painting upward along this seaweed until it's gone. And repeat this for this other little wisp over here. Option click and paint it away. For this large chunk, I'm going to use the Perfect Eraser, the Content Aware Fill tool in the photo suite. To get this cleanly removed, I need to paint over a pretty big area. You'll notice there's some indentation from where this seaweed's been sitting in the sand. The waves have been rushing around the seaweed, creating some patterns and shapes in the beach, and I need to remove all of that. So, choosing the Perfect Eraser and using a big old brush, I'll paint over the whole area here. I'm giving the Perfect Eraser lots of surrounding information to work with, and wow, that looks great. I'm really happy with that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Now to address this other wisp, let me zoom in again at 100% and position the navigator. You might think about using the Perfect Eraser for something like this, but let me show you what happens. If I paint over this with the eraser, the seaweed's gone, but the area erased is a little smoothed. And then on either side, here, let me switch to a different cursor so you can see this better. The area erased is smoothed. And on either side, there's sand texture. And in a smaller object like this, that difference becomes more noticeable. To maintain the texture while removing the wisp, I'll use the Clone Stamp tool. You saw me do this just a moment ago. I'm going to work my way down this string of seaweed, option clicking to select samples and painting it away piece by piece. I'm also alternating sides when I choose the sample points. That helps avoid repeating patterns and just get a nicer blend overall. Almost there now. Option click and paint. Option click and paint over the rest of this string. There we go. That looks real nice. Let me take one last look at the left edge of the seaweed. These strings I'm okay with. They're part of the larger whole and not really distracting. And I don't see any other spots that are really bothering me. Okay, with retouching done, I'm going to switch this to a smart layer using the gear icon beneath the layer stack. So when I go into Effects, the adjustments will be re-editable. Now to bring this into Effects and add some stylization and finish this image up. There are three main things I want to pull out of this image in Effects. More definition in the fingers of water, get some more color pop in the seaweed, and a touch more definition in the sky. I'll start by opening my Extras pane with Command left arrow or Control left arrow on a PC because I have a preset that I think will be a very good starting point for this image, and it's called Faded Seascape. So I'll click on Faded Seascape and then do Command left arrow to hide that extras pane. And this is a good starting point. There's more detail on the lines of the ocean. It's kind of a little dingy for this photo, especially in the foreground, so it's going to need some fine-tuning to suit this image. I'll start at the bottom of the filter stack with dynamic contrast, and that's definitely adding a dingy, dirty look to the lower third of the image. I'll grab a masking bug, drop it just above the seaweed, and rotate it around to mask away the dynamic contrast from the foreground. So the lines of the water in the ocean are maintained, but I'm not adding that grunginess to the sand. I do, however, want some of that contrast in the seaweed itself. I'll choose the masking brush, set it to paint in, left bracket to shrink the brush size, and I'll paint over the seaweed, adding that contrast back in. Now notice the mask in the filter stack has changed to show that. In fact, let's take a look at the mask by selecting the red mode, and there's a spot or two where my brushing was sloppy. I can use the Erase Brush Strokes checkbox and then gently fill back in those areas. So why erase brush strokes? With this checkbox set, the brush will only affect areas of the mask that were applied with a masking brush. The smoother gradient masks from the masking bug aren't affected. Now, for example, if I try to paint away this area of the mask over here with Erase Brushstroke Set, nothing happens. The gradient from the masking bug is protected. If I deselect Erase Brushstrokes, my brushstrokes become destructive to those smooth, masking bug masks. So this is a very handy checkbox when you need to clean up a manual mask that intersects with masking bug masks. It's like the graduated filter brush in Lightroom CC, but this has been available in the suite since version 9. And let me turn off the mask now with Control M, and let's move on up the filter stack. For the adjustable gradient, I'm going to lower the position of the gradient a bit and increase its feather just a touch. And this is darkening the sky. The brightness sliders brought way down, and that's really it. None of the other sliders have been changed. Now let's take a look at vintage. I'm not feeling the vintage. Let's revisit that. What I want to do next is get more color into that seaweed. I'll add a new filter to the stack using the plus button beneath the filters and select the color enhancer. I'm going to choose the Fall Enhancer preset. Now, Fall Enhancer lends itself nicely to this photo. It's boosting the greens, which don't matter here, but if you look at the orange color range, the saturation's boosted a lot. So the orange tones in the seaweed and in the sky get a nice lift. These are amped up a little too much, so I can use the layer opacity of the color enhancer to rein those back in. I'll experiment a bit, clicking around on the slider, raising and lowering the overall effect, and that's looking all right. Yep, not bad at all. Back to this vintage setting. Okay, so I like it more now, what's happening in the upper half of the image. Let me back it off some a little bit more. Toggle the filter on and off for a quick before and after. Yep, I think I'll keep that vintage there. That looks a little nice. I still want a touch more crispness in the water, so let's experiment with a tone enhancer. I'll add that to the filter stack. And there's a preset that might work in the midtones area. Let me try midtones darker, and I'm just hovering my mouse over the preset, and I get a live preview of the effect. See, mid-contrast boost. Now, I like midtones darker, although this is a little much. So I'm going to take the layer opacity way down, all the way to 0 actually, and now slowly creep that effect back in until I like what I see. And I'm happy right around there, just shy of 20%. Okay, last but not least, I'll reactivate the vignette, nice subtle soft touch, and that does it. So here's the image I brought in from Lightroom after some basic adjustments. And here's the final image. I like this. It's a simple composition, yet dynamic with a lot of motion and complementary lines. I like how the flow of the water plays with the flow of the sky. Sometimes simple is beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed this Perfect Inspiration episode. Again, my sincere thanks to my friends at On1 for inviting me back. My name is Scott Davenport. You can visit me at scottdavenportphoto.com, connect with me on social media, and share your work. Happy shooting, everyone.